It's been 6 months already? Well, then, let's talk about it. So yeah, the S23 series of phones released 6 months ago at this point, and in this video, we're going to be talking about the S23 Ultra, what's changed, what's different, and whether you should buy it 6 months later or not. Let's get into all of that. So the S23 Ultra, like most other flagship phones in 2023, has a really good display, a really good camera, really good build quality, amazing battery life, and just a really good overall user experience. And all of this was true 6 months ago when this phone released. So 6 months later, how much of it is true? Well, let's start with the display. So we know the display is really good. It's made by Samsung. It's basically a 10 out of 10. It's a 1440p display which gets up to 1750 nits, which can get really bright, so it's readable in the sun, no problem at all. And it has HDR10 plus certification for videos and movies. It looks amazing. 6 months later, I still open this phone and get amazed by the display. And sometimes, even though I shouldn't do this probably, I crank up the brightness and just leave it on my desk for my peripheral vision because the display is just that beautiful. So 6 months later, the display is a 10 out of 10 absolutely, and I think if you buy it now still, you'll find that to be true. So usually the camera part of a review is last, but I want to talk about it now. So the camera setup of the S23 Ultra is actually very similar to last year's S22 Ultra in that it has 4 cameras on the back, 1 camera on the front, but these are the following changes from last year to this year. So last year we had a main 108 megapixel camera on the S22 Ultra, and this year now we have a 200 megapixel camera. That's insane. There are a few advantages that come with that feature, one of which is that you can retain the quality and zoom in or crop or blow up the image and you won't lose that much detail. Another advantage that this 200 megapixel sensor brings is 50 megapixel raw photos. So last year you were only able to take 12 megapixel raw photos, which isn't really that bad for a smartphone. But this year, to catch up with the rest of the flagship smartphones, you can now take 50 megapixel raw photos using the Expert RAW app. And as per usual, this app is made by Samsung, and so it's providing a lot of flexibility for what you can do. You have kind of like a manual mode where you can change the shutter speed, the ISO, the manual focus, all that stuff. But for now, all you need to know is that this phone takes really good photos in its 200 megapixel mode and its 50 megapixel RAW mode. And also the regular 12 megapixel mode, but that's pretty obvious. Another welcome change in the camera from the S22 Ultra to the S23 Ultra is that now you can shoot 8K video at 30 FPS without cropping. So last year with the S22 Ultra, you can only shoot 8K at 24 FPS with like an unusable crop, like it would crop into the frame so much so that it's unusable almost. But this year with the S23 Ultra, you can shoot 8K at 30 FPS with a normal crop. So this is what it looks like actually. I'm shooting on the S23 Ultra right now at 8K 30 FPS, and this is what it looks like. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. So 6 months later, the 8K video recording and the 200 megapixel sensor have both held up really well. And there's one last change, and that's up in the front facing camera. So last year's S22 Ultra had a 40 megapixel camera and it was pretty good, but it lacked a few little things that you'd notice over time. But this year with the S23 Ultra, they've downsized it from 40 megapixels to 12 megapixels. And on paper, this might seem like, why'd they do that? That's a negative. They went backwards. But this 12 megapixel camera performs a little bit better than the 40 megapixel camera from last year. And again, 6 months later, this front-facing camera will definitely make you smile in your selfies. So that's what's new from last year's phone to this year's phone, and it's held up pretty well 6 months later. The next thing that's really good about this phone that initially got really good reviews is the processor. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy processor. Samsung worked with Qualcomm in that they kind of fine-tuned the processor to work better with Samsung and their software. Kind of like what Apple did with their A12 or whatever, A15, A16 Bionic chips for their iPhones, or with their M1 or M2 processors for their MacBooks, or even Google with their Tensor chips. All of that was manufactured and produced around the software so that everything can be seamless and more efficient. And 6 months later, the positive reviews have either stayed the same or it's just gotten better. It's thanks to the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 for Galaxy processor that this phone provides and delivers such a good software experience for Android and Samsung and even new Samsung users. I've read so many posts online, like on Reddit and on Twitter, about people switching from the iPhone to this phone, and their experience was very positive. And I guess that kind of makes sense, right? If you want people to switch over from iOS and like iPhone, which is such a smooth user experience, then you have to make your own software just as smooth, if not smoother. And this S23 Ultra with its Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor and all its efficiencies has delivered. And that's a good segue into the battery life of this phone. The Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 processor has helped this same battery, same size battery as last year, perform like twice as good, if not more. Out of the box 6 months ago, this phone's battery life was probably better than my iPhone 13 Pro Max, whose battery life is actually better than the iPhone 14 Pro Max, the newer one. I could watch videos all day, scroll TikTok and Instagram all day, I could take videos all day, I can do everything on this phone, and this phone still would not die. That's how good this phone was. Well, I'm happy to say that 6 months later, this phone's battery life is actually still just as good. And there's a couple reasons why. So first and foremost, you can't ignore the size of the battery. It's a 5000 mAh battery, and that's a pretty big battery. And secondly, while this phone does support 45 watt fast charging, I don't really use like wired charging. I prefer to use wireless charging, which I think is better for the battery health anyways. Thirdly and lastly, I use this one software trick which limits the charge to 85%. To maintain good battery health, it's best practice to keep the battery charged between 20% and 80%. So this battery limiting feature makes it easy to do just that and prolong your phone's battery to make it last that much longer. So the build quality and the design, how have those held up over the 6 months? Well, mostly I've been using it in a case, the first party case from Samsung. I got it as a promotion, so I was like, why not? But I don't use a screen protector because this is a curved screen and it's hard to find good screen protectors for a curved screen like this. So while it's been in a case, the screen hasn't been protected. So you'd expect there to be some scratches or some sort of wear and tear on the screen. But there is no scratches, no kind of signs of wear and tear. It's a 10 out of 10 screen in terms of build quality. And in terms of design, some people might find it boring, but realistically, how much better can it get? Last year it was really good with the S22 Ultra, the year before it was really good with the S21 Ultra. It's just been really good over the last 6 months as well. It hasn't really looked or felt boring, and really you're using your phone for things other than like admiring the design or whatever. So in the design department, 6 months later, I'm pretty happy with it. Not boring to me, and it's pretty cool. I like the curves as well because it's easier to hold in the hand. And now what about the extras, like the in-display fingerprint scanner or the built-in S Pen? What about these kind of extras and like a bunch of other software features? Well, the in-display fingerprint scanner I use on a daily almost because it's there, why not? And it adds as an authentication method, so it's pretty good. It's fast, reliable. It's like basically a 9.999 out of 10. And the S Pen, I have to admit, I don't really use it as much. I know there's all these crazy features like highlighting and magnifying and custom screenshots and scrolling and all these air gestures powered by Bluetooth, but I just use the S Pen as a remote shutter, to be honest, for the camera, and it's pretty helpful for that, but otherwise I don't use the S Pen that much. So 6 months later, the fingerprint scanner or the S Pen haven't gotten better, but they also haven't gotten worse, which is a net positive in my books. The speakers are also really good. The speakers on the S23 Ultra are really good too. The highs are high, there's quite a lot of bass, and it's just overall really good. Everything's clear. What you're hearing now are the speakers from the S23 Ultra, and let me know what you think down below compared to the device that you're listening on. So should you buy the S23 Ultra 6 months later? That's a complicated question, but I'll try to simplify it for you as much as I can. I would definitely say yes to getting this phone 6 months later, especially if you can find one on Facebook Marketplace or Kijiji or something like that for a pretty good price. I've seen this go for like $800, $850. I would definitely get that. And 6 months later, it'll feel like, depending on the condition of the phone, it'll feel like you still have a really brand new phone for a like half of the price. So that's my take. I think you should buy it, but what's your take? I want to know what you think in the comments down below, so let me know. Would you buy this phone, or would you recommend this phone to other people 6 months later? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you're on your way there, leave a like, subscribe to see more, and share this with your friends and family who you think will be interested in getting an S23 Ultra, or who you know is looking for a new phone to buy. And this might just be it. Alright, that's it from me. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.